Hi everybody, today I'm going to talk to you about understanding test and exam questions in psychology. My class, we did go through this, but please rewatch it before our test on Tuesday. And I want to say a massive thank you to Carolyn Pinchbeck. So a significant amount of these resources have come from Carolyn and I absolutely loved it. So massive thanks to Carolyn. So the first thing we're going to talk about is lead-in verbs. So S.E.X.y has very specific language that it dictates to teachers in terms of how we ask questions, and you'll also find that across all of your subjects these will be consistent. So I've got a list here of all of the lead-in verbs that you could encounter in psychology, but just a couple of points here. The ones that are larger, so we've got describe, explain, calculate and identify, they are the main ones that you'll encounter. So really important that you understand them all. And have a look at that sheet that I provided in class that's come from the S.E.X.y guide in terms of definitions and examples of those and an explanation of how to answer each type of question, because they are quite unique in terms of what they're asking for. So make sure that when you're in the test, you are always looking at that lead-in verb to see what it's asking you to do. Okay, the next part here is just deconstructing a question. So if you got a question like this, so it's come from the personality topic. So describe one psychodynamic approach to personality psychology. And this question is worth 4 marks. So I guess the first thing to talk about is you can see that this question is very vague. And that's for a good reason. I'll explain that in a minute. But the first thing you'll see is the lead-in verb in red there. So we've got describe. We then have a qualifier of 1. So you're always going to be told how many you need to give or how much detail or what specifically you need to be talking about. So that's your qualifier. In green here we have the particular language from the S.E.X.y course outline. So I provide you with this for every topic as the checklist. So really important that you are familiar with that language because that is what you will find in the test. Okay. The word in pink there, that is the trigger word. So given that questions are constructed to be quite vague, given all the possible content we can cover, this is a trigger word that is going to tell you what content knowledge, what topic knowledge you need to recall in order to answer this question. Okay. You will also notice that this question isn't actually a question at all. And this is very, very common for S.E.X.y. I have almost never seen a question that was actually a question with a question mark. So it will always be a statement that is a statement of instruction, not a question. And that lead-in verb tells you what they want you to do. Now, probably one of the most important things here is the mark allocation. Really important here that you pay attention to that because it will tell you how much to write, and the lines will also indicate that as well, so how much space they've provided for you to answer. So this is, again, going to marks in more detail. So generally 1 mark equals 1 minute in a test. So if you're given a 60-mark test, it might be 40 marks for short answer, 20 marks for your extended response. They're expecting that'll take you 60 minutes plus 10 minutes of reading time. Now generally 1 mark equals 1 point, traditionally an identify kind of question. 2 marks is 1 point that is well explained and applied to the scenario. Really, really important that that is well explained and applied. So obviously following that logic, if you have a 4-mark question, that's 2 points. You need to explain them and apply them to the scenario. So if you aren't applied with a scenario, if you aren't given a scenario, you need to really explain that properly for you to get full marks for that question. Alright, so on that note, using scenarios, I talked to my class about the idea of maths. I really struggled with maths in class and my dad was kind enough to help me with it at home. And he always said to me, Amy, if they give you the value of X or if they give you something, you know that you are going to have to use that somewhere in your answer. You might not know where, but the fact that they've given you the value of X, you're going to have to use that somewhere. Okay, now the same is true of scenarios in psychology questions. If you're told that it's about a study that's being conducted by the government about students' attitudes towards schooling, you have to use that information in your answer. Really important that they haven't given it to you for no reason. You have to refer to it. Okay, this is also true if you are asked to calculate a mean. Very rare that a test maker will give you a test that just has a random set of numbers and say calculate the mean. They always give it a context and a scenario, and you have to apply that. So if you're calculating heart rates, it's never just given randomly. So it'd always be
the mean that you've generated or calculated. It's not just 15, it's 15 beats per minute. Okay, you need to always apply, even if it's that seemingly super easy question, always apply. Okay, if it's a long scenario, don't feel like you have to reword the scenario. It's not a trick. Pull keywords from that scenario in your answer. Super easy, but students sometimes get confused and feel like they have to rewrite it as though it's an English test. Okay, pull keywords. Okay, language of S.E.X.y. This is that outline that I've given you at the start of the year and also for every topic broken down. Okay, and this is what I was talking about when I said that tests are purposefully vague. You will never be asked a question as specific as, describe this person's particular theory on this very specific idea. Okay, it's always going to use the language of S.E.X.y. So instead of that question you can see on the screen, it's going to be something like, describe one psychodynamic approach to personality psychology, because that is what is in the outline. And the main message here is learn the language of that outline and use it to guide your revision. Use it to track what you're learning, make sure it's keeping me accountable for what we're doing and it's keeping you accountable for what you are learning as well. Okay, writing a sexy paragraph, my class is going to laugh at this because we've covered it so many times, but this might look very similar to what you do in English in terms of TEE or TEAL, but in psychology we want you writing sexy paragraphs. So the state here is giving a definition or summarizing the theoretical concept being assessed. Okay, and we want you to use simple sentences. This is why it's really important with your glossary to be keeping track of concepts and terminologies, because if you can revise hard enough, you can work hard enough, that will be burned into your brain. And that's a key part of answering questions, is being able to restate that theoretical concept. Okay, in red here we have explain. So explain the theory using as much psychological terminology as possible. That is super important. Okay, you need to be talking like a psychology student. You need to be using the right terminology. So I've talked to my class about last year, I heard the word bias way too many times. Okay, I want you to be using these specific terms that you are learning as you go. Okay, and breaking it down into steps if needed. So if the question says explain how, you need to go through the steps one by one to really show your marker that you understand that content. Okay, you need to paint a very clear picture. Here, feel free to use complex sentences as well. For the last one, for the X, so we're looking at an example. So show that you can actually apply this theory, show that you really understand it by either applying it to the scenario, if one is provided, which they almost always are, or by providing an example from the real world, which we always go through in class anyway. Okay, so use specific names, keywords or quotations from the scenario, okay, or again, coming up with an example. Okay, and here you can use simple and complex sentences. If you follow this structure the whole way through, there is no reason why you can't get full marks for every question if that theoretical concept is correct. So this is an example. You can see it's color-coded here. So the question is explain negative reinforcement using one example. So we've got a simple sentence here. Negative reinforcement involves the removal of an unpleasant or aversive stimulus. Okay, so that is not applied to the scenario. That is a direct definition that has come from that student's notes that they've remembered. Okay, they're then explaining it. This strengthens behavior and increases the likelihood of, that's supposed to be the behavior, occurring again in the future. Now we're going to get to the example, so applying it. Okay, this is a question from, I think it's a few years ago from an exam. It was a really long scenario. It was all about Alice. She was baking in the kitchen. Things were going wrong. People were getting in the way. So haven't given you the scenario, but you can tell here that it's being applied. So in a given scenario, burnt cakes are an aversive stimulus for Alice. And so the negative reinforcement is used as the behavior of taking the cakes out of the oven in time is strengthened. So that behavior is reinforced by the removal of the burnt cakes. So the removal of the negative aversive stimulus. Okay. Now we haven't got to our learning topic yet, so this might sound like French, but what I want you to take away here is that that sexy paragraph structure is what's being used here. Really important that you follow that.
Okay, some final tips for you. Number one, this is not English. We do not expect you to reword the question in your answer. So in English, you might be asked, what's the purpose of this text? And your answer would start with, the purpose of this text is to. Don't do that in psychology. Okay, you are given very limited time, make the most of it, and do not reword the question. You can start it with because, that is fine. Okay. Second point, budget your time, 1 mark per minute. If you are really struggling on a question and it's worth 2 marks, leave it and go back to it if you have time later. Also, if you have a 4-mark question and you finish it in 30 seconds, you should probably rethink how you've answered that question. Okay. My third tip is a personal tip that I give to students. So the extended response is worth 20 marks. I recommend planning that in your reading time. I recommend having a look through it, breaking down, highlighting words, making notes, and planning out what you're going to say in that extended response. Okay, that way when you get to it at the end, you aren't looking at it for the first time and panicking. You've actually had time to deconstruct it. The last point here is one that was reiterated in particular at the psychology conference this year. It was talking about unfamiliar situations that students are given in an exam, so unfamiliar scenarios, and that students often panic when they see a scenario that looks really unfamiliar. But that is done on purpose, because what the scenario is asking you to do is apply what you do know. You're not expected to know everything that could possibly be asked of you, but if you see a scenario that you don't know, doesn't look familiar, it's because you're being asked to apply familiar knowledge or content that you do know. Okay, so guys, hopefully this is going to help you with your test on Tuesday. Best of luck. Please write sexy paragraphs, budget accordingly, and all of the above. Bye.